What is happening out there, Roto Scouts basketball fans? Welcome to the Monday Basketball Show, gang. Good to see everybody here. Sorry to keep you waiting for a couple minutes there. Oh, weird. Looks like my little banner deal went away again. I don't know why that keeps happening. It's weird. It's got my name up there, but the logo keeps disappearing. Ah, pop that back up there. Where's my little... Yeah, my little overlay went away. That's not it. I am live with StreamYard. How you guys doing out there? Good start to the week. Everybody had decent weekends? Hopefully things went well for football and all your other endeavors. I had an okay football weekend. Felt like it could have been better. Just missed a couple spots where it was, 8 points instead of 12 points with a pivot that was in a different lineup in that spot. Just one of those ones where it was like, ooh, we had everything. Didn't quite come together. But a really interesting basketball day to talk about today. We've got values all over the board. We've got missing pieces all over the board. Minute scrambles to deal with in OKC, in Houston with a couple guys out. It's just a messy slate, and it's a really interesting one. I actually love slates like this. 5 games, they all lock at 5 games. They all lock, little camera adjustment there. They all lock at 8 o'clock. So it's, you get your lineups and that's it. No switching, no staying up, watching every last piece of news and making changements and making adjustments. This is a sprint through these 5 games and it's going to be a blast. I really, really enjoy slates like this. And there's numbers all over the place that we got to go through here. So to start us out, let me go through. Let me actually pull up the most current Vegas data. I didn't move it over. Just scrambling. I haven't looked through these most recent sim results yet, so we're going to discover some of that together. But some obvious value guys shooting up toward the top of the board. But breaking down the Vegas board real quick, just per pinnacle. Kings and the Spurs. Kings favored by 1.5 on the road, 221 point total in that one. I don't know how many pieces we're getting from either one. Again, it's on the screen. You guys can see it right now, and I can't, but we'll look through it in just a minute. But when I think about the Kings, I think about the big chunks of Domantas Sabonis that we get a lot of the time when the field isn't necessarily there. That's a guy I'm going to be interested in. The Spurs have a weird minutes distribution with Devin Vassell expected back. It's really, Wemby up at the top. We'll see where Chris Paul fits into the slate on that side, but probably more interested in the Kings with all the minutes the top guys play. And I'm real curious to see where like a Sabonis fell on a short slate like this because he could be a potential difference maker. Fox a little bit less so. There's definitely pieces and parts there. No Malik Monk also is an impact for them. The Nets, the Pelicans still missing a ton of different pieces. It's a low total. 210 is the lowest total of the night. It's one of the lowest totals we've had in the season so far. Nets favored by 1.5 on the road. We'll get into the injuries and the absences in that one in just a second, but probably more pieces from the Nets side. Clips and the Thunder. Thunder lost Chet Holmgren last night. If you didn't see it, he's out for an indefinite period of time. Broken hip, which is not good for a big, lanky dude like that. Just doesn't seem like one of those injuries. That's one that, not only this season, obviously, in threat now. That's one that's good. I like the kid. I don't want to cast, negative thoughts out there, but that's the kind of injury you hear, and it's like, ooh, that could be career-changing, Which is a shame. Kid's good. Just needs to be out there. 219-point total there. Definitely pieces and parts. It's just going to depend on where some of those minutes fall. Jalen with an E is one of the top-owned players on both sites. He's going to look real good. 6.5 points in the Clippers' favor still, but definitely going to be some interesting pieces in the OKC favor. Definitely going to be some interesting pieces from the Clippers side. The ugly game with the giant point total. Rockets favored by 12.5 at home over the Wizards. 230-point total. Wizards getting Kyle Kuzma back. Rockets without Freddie VanVleet. Definitely an interesting one. I'm sure you guys are noticing on the board there where Amin Thompson is currently getting exposed in our top 150 now. He's one of the top-owned players on the DraftKings board. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be an ugly game, but there are a bunch of just mid-board type values in that one. And then rounding things out, 237-point total, then the most interesting game of the night from the scoring perspective. The Cavs and the Bulls. Cavs favored by 8 on the road in Chicago. Chicago expecting Zach LaVine. He's probable for today. Usual pieces and parts on both sides of that one, but by far the most compelling total of the day. So definitely a game we're going to want to get invested in a little bit. But it's fun not having to sweat leaving swappability for late, just getting all these games right at 8 o'clock. I love that. As far as the ins, the outs, and all that stuff, let's see. It is 4:55, so let's see if we got any new news. Tuesday. No new news. All right. So we did get Kyle Kuzma off the injury report for Washington, which is a bump for them. Kenrich Williams also not on the injury report today. So he's back in mid-teens type minutes. And then per the last injury report, Trey Murphy making his season debut today. We knew that yesterday. Typo there. And then LaVine is also probable. Murphy's just listed under the probables, but he's confirmed available. Questionables, Dorian Finney-Smith, Jalen Smith, Malachi Branham, Carlton Carrington, Bub, Rashawn Holmes, Steven Adams. And then the outs, Bojan Bogdanovic, Day'Ron Sharpe, Trenton Watford, Jordan Hawkins, Herb Jones, CJ McCollum, DeJounte Murray, Zion Williamson. Literally a starting 5 on the out list for the Pellies. Max Strus, Lonzo Ball, Mo Bamba, Kawhi Leonard, PJ Tucker, Isaiah Hartenstein continues to be out. Chet Holmgren is out. Nikola Topic is out for the season. Jalen with a Y is out. Devin Carter, Malik Monk, Orlando Robinson, Trey Jones, Jeremy Sohan, Sadiq Bey, Malcolm Brogdon, and Freddie Van Vliet are all out. Other than that, we should be pretty good to go there. Did I project Devin Carter? I listed him out. I just want to make sure I didn't project him for some reason. I didn't. Okay. The only Devin I projected is Vassell. All right. So that's all up on the site right now. Latest update went in not too long ago. Let me get back to chat here. See what you guys are doing. Little lamenting the death of the Dallas Cowboys. Right there with you. I'm a Giants fan. You'll note that I'm not wearing a Giants hat today, although I am wearing yet another blue Giants t-shirt. Bottom of the barrel. This was the last one. I was talking about it on the football show the other day. Accidentally left myself a big pile of blue t-shirts to wear this week. Not the best move for this past week. But we're down to the bottom. I actually didn't do any laundry today, which is going to be problematic tomorrow. You might not want to smell me tomorrow, but that's okay. Meanwhile, I forgot to get placeholders in, and it's bugging me. I've got them in the bigger one right now, but I also wanted to jump into that solid little $3 that FanDuel's running, and I missed it. I'm going to try and see if I can crackhead my way into some lineups as people cancel. But anyway, let's get into this thing. Jerry Jones will never do what's right for the team. He doesn't care about winning. He cares about the limelight and control. Jerry might have flipped at this point. He might be more like, I'd like to win one before I check out for eternity. How much is he really in the limelight? Control, sure. But he's had control for 50 years or 30 years or whatever it's been. He's not really in the limelight. Like, who really gives a shit about Jerry Jones at this point? So he's just kind of there. I think he's probably flipped back to, oh shit, I wish I was currently running a winning team rather than having all the control, all the power. Could be wrong. But yeah, they're a mess. They're not as big a mess, though, as my New York Giants, in my opinion. But it hasn't been pretty. I think we're also just dealing with NFC East teams to a degree where it's just like you play the Eagles and it's like one of the class teams of all football right now. It's as far as their talent levels go, as far as how they've put that team together over the past few years. You see DC up and coming, so it's just harder to be a fan of the other NFC East teams right now. So anyway, a couple of Rockets dominating the top of the board right now. Tari Eason was the guy that I was expecting to see here early in the day when I first put this together. Is basically I put it all together and then I rechecked the injury stuff, and then it was Fred VanVleet out and I had to redo the Rockets completely. So Amin Thompson shoots to the top of the board on DraftKings right now, 4,900 shooting guard and small forward eligibility. You've also got $4,800 Tari Eason there, small forward and power forward eligibility. Both of those guys, huge chunks. We're getting way more Amin Thompson versus the field, but the field is in the 50% range on that DraftKings slate in the ownership that ran here. Amin was the guy that typically stepped in this situation last year. He was a 1.14 per minute player on 17% usage last year. He's a 0.91 per minute player on both sites this season, and that's just on 17% usage in his limited role. In wrestling with it, I've got him basically right in between. I wasn't taking him up to 1.14, certainly. I put him at 0.99. It's almost exactly splitting the baby. And I think that's fairly realistic. But obviously on both sites, if you want to level off, come down to 70%, wherever you want to be on a guy like that, he's just a value building block. I'm kind of surprised he hit as hard as he did on the FanDuel slate at 5,600. Both guard spots. It makes sense with a little flexibility across the guards, but that's a huge chunk. For 56, it's a value, but it's not a crazy value. It's not like he's 41. So I'm kind of surprised he's that exposed there. But again, a player who's demonstrated the ability to succeed when he steps into this role and should have the minutes. I have him at 33 right now. Şengün, usual role for him, but looks terrific. One of the solid point per minute players on this entire slate. 142 FanDuel, 140 on DraftKings so far this season. Cost just $7,900 at center on both sites. Dominating the center shares on FanDuel at 73%. 74% of them on DraftKings. And then Eason sliding in basically level with the field at 35 on FanDuel, where he's 5,600 also. Power forward, small forward eligibility there. 4,800, we got a lot more Tari Eason, which again was the starting point. As I was putting it together, I was like, oh, that'll pop. But then all this other stuff exploded up to the top of the board. Dennis chimes in, oh, you're talking about the Cowboys in an NFL title. For a sec, I thought you were talking about me in a GPP. I feel you, buddy. Those doldrums between the wins can get painful sometimes. But we'll get you back there. And you've been there before. Always better to have been there before and know what you're missing than just sit there wondering. Nah, Mamba, I think I'm gonna punt on the football showdown show. Projections are up right now. If you want to talk about it during this show, we can chat about it. But I'm probably not going to jump up. It's just a slow day getting to things for me today. I was wiped out after the weekends, and not that I did anything. I was doing this. But I just did not sleep. So got a little bit of a late jump today, and it's kind of impacting that. But great football game. I mean, you've got killer pieces to work with as far as the skill players on both sides, two really solid quarterbacks. Probably wouldn't mess too much with the defenses in this one. I know it's been a thing, maybe the kickers, but I like a lot of touchdown scoring in that matchup. Those are two capable teams as far as receivers go. Mixing and matching your way through those skill players in the captain or MVP spot on both sites, I think makes a ton of sense. On DraftKings, you're always going to want to have the quarterbacks for the correlated scoring and just for the raw scoring that they put up, but you can put them in your flex spots. But yeah, a lot to like about that game. Really compelling game. Kind of annoyed with myself that I'm not going to be doing a show, to be quite honest. Thanks for asking. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe on this show. Any football slate questions or anything like that you want to pop up, I can pull the projections open and just take a look at where I'm at on guys if you guys have things about that. But yeah, please do. Best Monday Night Football game of the year. I don't disagree. It's just a matter of time. I mean, if I get us out of here at 6 and then things are calm, there's always the chance that at 7 I'm just screw it, let's do a show, but probably not. The showdown shows have very specific audiences if I run into that time slot too, where everybody's just watching something else. So the last couple times I've tried to do one in that time slot, we've been 8-10 of us. So let's get through this one, though, and then we'll see. So let's jump to, we'll go positions as usual. Some of these are going to be thinner than others. See some pretty strong undercuts. And part of that is, I think, just created by these dominant few guys that are getting just gigantic chunks of ownership. And it's not that these hard undercuts are, no ownership on any of those. But we're below the field on a number of these. So the Sims came out with very, very specific positions on this slate. Maybe a little bit more so than other times. But starting things off, so Amin Thompson, again, 0.91 per minute so far this season. But fills categories, in the limited action, he's played 23 minutes a night, essentially. Or 24 minutes a night. 23 last game, put up 20.5 FanDuel points. 50.84% true shooting, a 12% assist rate, an 11% rebounding rate. Can get involved and can definitely fill a stat line for you. So as long as those minutes come up, we should be okay with high 20s to about that projection and then with a little ceiling beyond it. And I think it makes him a relatively decent mid-board value block. And obviously comes up like crazy as far as the math goes. 87% exposure way above the field FanDuel, 96% of your top 150 and way above the field DraftKings. Again, if you want to trim that by 15, 20% on either site, no issue with it. Spread out some shares to other guys. I think it makes a ton of sense. Another guy that we got to talk about on DraftKings, $3,100 Reed Shepherd is also popping up. I've got him at just 23 minutes. He's a 0.66 per minute player. I saw him projected at one specific other site about 5 or 6 points beyond where I've got him in about the same amount of minutes. That really concerns me that people would get way too excited. If you project him more, look how much he came up. Nearly 50% of the time with a 17-point projection at the 3,100 point guard shooting guard. And again, we're talking about a guy who's been 0.70 per minute so far in his brief career. He's played 11.5 minutes a night. The other day, he did go for about a point per minute, 11.3 minutes, 11.6 FanDuel points. But I don't know that we're going to sustain that level of production, and I don't think it makes sense to give it to him just kind of out of the gate like this. I think the minutes are going to be there. But at 3,100, I would so much rather be a little bit light and still be around like 50%. Because, again, he is getting a ton of attention, at least in that site's ownership. I'm curious with anybody who's got eyeballs on it elsewhere. How are other places projecting Reed Shepherd for ownership? You don't have to give me the number, but, is it significant? Is it more like this FanDuel exposure that we're getting to? 26% of them for 3,900 on FanDuel still feels like a chunk. But if that's significantly below the field, where this is just a little bit of a haircut from where the field's at, it's critically different price, 3,100. If there's anything real about him being able to go out and deliver, honestly, even 0.75 is okay at that price. That's why we did get him this much. But this is how much you get him when he's here. If I gave him another 0.3 of a fantasy point per minute, put him at like 23, he would have been probably owned in 100% of these lineups and boxed some of that Amin Thompson out a little bit. Okay. So these guys are more excited about it. It sounds like that low 30s, mid 30s exposure is more like where I think he should be, as far as they probably have him projected pretty similarly. Mama says a 28-point lock. All right. That would be a couple of standard deviations on top. But yeah, so if you think about it through that lens, then that means our 48% exposure here, if the other place is correct about the ownership, which I suspect they are, that means that this is a little bit ahead of that field. It's all going to depend on, who's getting the most information from where. But one of these sources was a little bit shaky today. They were projecting Isaiah Hartenstein in for a while, which is not going to happen today. So there was a little bit of weirdness going on. I think they're still trying to figure out, if you know where I'm talking about, trying to figure out some new employees and who's handling what. 40% assist versus Washington. Yeah, I don't love cherry picking, one sample there, but yeah, it did go for a point per minute the other day. But again, it's in 11 minutes. You got to be really, really careful about these things. So maybe I could give him a little bit more. We're, again, 0.66 FanDuel, 0.70 DraftKings. I've got him at I've got him at 0.77 DraftKings, so I'm already giving him a little bit there. If I were to go to... I would not want to take him beyond 20 points as a projection. Let's say that. Right? So if you're going to give him a little bit of a bump, I wouldn't take him to the point per minute range. If you think he's playing 20 to 24 minutes like I do, I would keep him below 20 fantasy points. I might give him a little bit more in the next update to try and level him off a little bit. But again, that would just end up dropping him into way more against the field than what we're getting here. I'm not sure that's necessarily the right move. We'll kick it around. Nice seeing a big star in the mix of all these, medium to crappy value guys. Shea coming up at 10-2 with plenty to do on the FanDuel slate. 10,000 on DraftKings. Puts him in a really good price point for all the scoring he's going to have to do, for all the point creation he's going to have to do. 1.43 per minute FanDuel and DraftKings so far this season. 31% usage with the presumption of a little bit more with some shots available. 63.3% of our FanDuel exposure and coming up ahead of the field. Field is there, though. That's well ahead, but the field is definitely there on Shea. We also got the same chunk of Kevin Huerter, a couple spots down on FanDuel, just kind of noteworthy there is a totally different price play. 52% of Shea on the DraftKings slate, level with the field. That's a kind of player where if you want to grab a few more shares, especially with a bunch of value pieces to move around the board, no problem grabbing a couple additional shares of SGA. Essentially on this slate, anybody projected above like 40, you could probably fairly say, all right, a few more shares of this, especially when there's situations around it. Like coming down the board here, we got Brandon Ingram 16% of the time. 8,600. He's got point guard and small forward eligibility uniquely on DraftKings. If you want to take some more of that at one spot or the other, I see no issue with it. With all those missing bodies in New Orleans, he's going to have to do stuff. 116 per minute so far this year on 30% usage. He was at 113 on 26.9 last year. So there's a tenth of a point missing there of creation on a night where his shot's going down. So that's the kind of player on a 5-game slate where you can grab a few additional shares, level back off with the field, but our 16 here is a pretty hard undercut, where with Shea, we're slightly ahead or at least level with the field, and he's a permanent monster who we know is going to be the dominant player in probably that whole game. So taking more shares of him is even more advisable. But guys like Ingram, guys like Darren Fox, like Sabonis, who I mentioned earlier, further down the board like James Harden hiding all the way down here at no exposure. I would be happy to have a few shares of James Harden on either side. Jose Alvarado just continuing on in this role that he's had. 0.99 per minute FanDuel so far and like 2 points more usage. 0.99 DraftKings. Popping up on both sides, but he's an undercut on FanDuel at 22%. We've got very, very specific direction on FanDuel going through these three players across a bunch of the guard shares. And then scraps going to everybody else, but 22%, not nothing. 34% on DraftKings. It's an undercut to the field, but it's a little bit more gentle with that slight angle and the yellow shading there. I think the field's in like the 40s. Kevin Huerter for 4,400, 45 on DraftKings. Usual complement of minutes. Played 26-1 per night. Played 34-7 the other day, so I split the difference. He's at 30. No Malik Monk out there. Should be plenty of opportunity Kevin Huerter to do Kevin Huerter things on his usual 16, 17% usage. Puts him right at his range of 0.85, 0.86. Definitely a viable mid-board building block at worst. Monster player on FanDuel at 63%. That's above the field pretty significantly. On DraftKings, we are a little bit below the field. 30% exposure, though, in our top 150. He's a key piece. Just kind of... He's not quite mid-range as far as that price goes, but it's very much he is who he is, and the minutes are going to fluctuate a little bit. I don't think he's going to go out and suddenly see 25% usage or anything in this game. But him just floating through this game for 30-plus minutes as Kevin Huerter, that could pay the bills at these prices. Lou Dort is not quite that guy. I know he's been at 0.88 this year, but he's 0.73 last year.
His usage is 3 points lower, 2.5 points lower than Kevin Huerter's. He's just a less productive per minute fantasy player. 4,900, he's more expensive than Huerter with the same positioning on the FanDuel slate. We got him just 10% of the time and a pretty hard undercut to the field there. But he's 4,100 on DraftKings. He's 400 less than Kevin Huerter on DraftKings. So that keeps him very involved. You can see the difference created in the value score. There's a slight difference in those value marks. Huerter is the more valuable of the two, and that's why we got a little bit more of them. But it's a separation of like 6 points. We're a little bit below the field on both guys. But it's definitely at least a playable upside piece on the DraftKings slate, or at least like a role filler for a fair price. Nothing wrong with having some Lou Dort 1 out of 4 somewhere in that neighborhood. If you wanted to take it down to 1 out of 5, I don't think that's necessarily a mistake. If you're buying more Huerter or some of the other values and spreading things out, I don't think that's a mistake on a short slate. Darius Garland starting to slip a little bit as far as our exposures go because his price is up by like 1,000 over the last week on FanDuel and now basically in the correct range. He's been at 1.18 FanDuel points per minute so far this season. That's why we're getting so much of them. But now we're down to 10%, pretty hard undercut to the field. Definitely a quality enough player where a few additional shares, if the field's 25-30 there, and we're getting only 10, if you wanted to take it up 15, 18, somewhere in that territory, just to have a little bit more on a short slate, that's perfectly fine. He's been good enough to justify that this season. 25% usage, returning a very significant scoring rate. 1.23 per minute on DraftKings. He's 7,100 over there. It's about level with where he's been. We got him 23% of the time. It's a little bit of an undercut to the field. Just a ton of shares going through some of those other guys. But definitely a playable piece on both sides at the absolute worst, and a guy with a real ceiling. That's the game with the highest total of the entire slate. So we've got some expectations of scoring in that one. We've got some expectations of guys maybe with a little bit of an uptick over their usual actual real-life NBA point scoring. Of course, games like that, if guys are missing, creates additional rebounding opportunities, so on and so forth. Zach LaVine in that same game, haircut to the field for him pretty significantly on the FanDuel board. 6,900, good price to find Zach LaVine, honestly. He's just been 0.94 last year, 0.97 this year. He's hovering around or below that 1.0 range in most games. It's right about where I've got him today. Where do I have him? I have him slightly under, 31.5 FanDuel points in 33 minutes. So that's the 0.95-ish. I'm not going to do the math in my head. On DraftKings, we got a significant chunk more. That's basically been true about all of these guys. We're getting a little bit more, but still undercuts to the field on all these guys over here on DraftKings. The guard spot's really interesting. Look at all these undercuts. Again, what this suggests is that there are specific directions in the math. If you're playing the math and you're playing 150 lineups, you would do well to take some pretty specific positions. But if you're more inclined to spread out and grab as much of the slate as you can on a 5-gamer, and if you're more concerned maybe in the cashing range, or if you're building fewer lineups, then there are pockets of under ownership in some of these guys. There are pockets where you can invest a little bit more. LaVine doesn't necessarily qualify for that. I'm looking at least for 1.0 plus or a cheap guy in a situation if I'm doing something like that. He's a good player, but just looks a little bit like is who he is outside of the game environment. Cam Thomas is interesting. I was expecting to get a little bit more Cam. I think maybe he got chewed up by some of the values that he merged. Like Amin Thompson for 56 probably just gobbled up a ton of Cam Thomas shares that would have otherwise fallen into that spot at 72. 5.3% exposed below the field on FanDuel, 18%. Again, a little haircut to the field. Field's probably 23, 25 in there. Scoring dependent player who is very capable of ripping off an upside game on any given slate. 1.01 on 29.6% usage last year, 0.97 on 31.8 this year. Giving Cam Thomas an additional 2 points worth of usage for the season so far should be paying more dividends than it has. So that's, again, scoring-dependent player. If the shot's not falling, he doesn't do all that much else. But if you get the day where the shot's falling, and honestly, this could be a good matchup for it despite that low total, not a bad play. But definitely a hard undercut to the field. I'm kind of, again, surprised by that, but I think I know exactly where it went. I think it's just all caught up in some of these guys. Ingram, we talked about, playable on either site, but an undercut to the field on both, 23% and 16%, and our hardest undercut on DraftKings so far against the field. But again, with all the availability of time, of usage, with everybody being, again, essentially an entire, not their starting five, but an entire starting five is on the injury report for the Pellies here. So Ingram could just step up for I'm Brandon Ingram and I'm going to do my thing type day. He has, in terms of the ongoing usage, 30.2% up from his 26.9 last year. But it's only benefited in 1.16 versus 113. Good player, not a great player. Capable of taking advantage of the situation. I do really like the weird eligibility point guard small forward there. Darren Fox, again, I mentioned him from Sacto as a piece that maybe if the field's not getting too crazy, him, Sabonis, and some of these other guys, maybe those are pivot points at worst. And that seems like how he functions right now. 14%, figure the field's in the 18 to 20% range there. Same thing on DraftKings. If you wanted to take him up into the 25% range and be 5 points above instead of 5 points below the field on a player like that, that's perfectly fine. His usage is down a little bit. His permanent numbers are down a little bit, but any given slate, more than capable of spiking back up to that. And matchup against San Antonio, not really sweating anything defensively there. So definitely could be an upside day for Fox where you're getting a few more shares. Mitchell at 23 on FanDuel, but only 11% on DraftKings. He's a $8,100 option on both sites, which means he's a little bit better value against the FanDuel slate. 11.3% exposure over there for a 116 per minute player. Again, the highest end game environment of the day. It would not shock me for Donovan Mitchell to go out there and have himself a day in a high scoring environment. He's on the correct side of that as far as which of those teams is going to be facing the better defense. I wouldn't have much issue taking more Mitchell, honestly, just in one of the best players on the slate overall and not necessarily mispriced. But the way that he fits into the slate, he is just priced for being Donovan Mitchell in this game at 81. There's ceiling there, but from the median, it's difficult to see how he lands in winning lineups against all these guys that he would have to replace as far as those shares go. So just know that you know what you're doing and know that you would have to find a different value at a different position at one of the forward spots to lock into that lineup. LeVert, just an is who he is, 10% on FanDuel, 9% on DraftKings. Below the field on both sites, he has been a 1.17 per minute player so far this year. He played 31-4. He put up exactly 31-4 in their last game, but he averages about 24 minutes, 23 and a half. I've got him at 24 tonight. I don't really see him launching himself into massive shares unless there was a change above him. Isaiah Joe did not come up on the FanDuel slate, and I'm fine with that. Again, there's a just opening for people to play, to play a few additional minutes here and there or take a few additional shots here and there for OKC. But Isaiah Joe, not exactly a direct beneficiary of that. And 0.80 this year on 15.9, 0.80 last year on 15.7. The definition of it is who he is. I might call that an Isaiah Joe spot from now on. Kesson Wallace is basically the same thing. 0.74 last year on 12%, 0.73 this year on 12.8%. We didn't really get him on FanDuel. We didn't really get him that much on DraftKings. Big undercuts to the field on both. But those are low-owned guys where a couple additional shares of either one just against the field for whatever is fine. They're not expensive. They're just alternate value pieces. 36, 37 versus the 41s, the 39s, the 45s up here. So in a little bit of a rotation with all these guys essentially 10, 15, 12% owned, you can go up and down with any of those shares. If you want to sink shares into, just take these 7% and sink it all into Isaiah Joe or the other way around. It's not a mistake. You're just leveling off with the field on the one guy and not having the other. They're both low-end, low per minute, low expectation types. Brandon Boston's seen a little bit of an uptick in per minute so far this season, but it's actually on less usage. 38.2 minutes the other day for New Orleans, 43.7 FanDuel points. Pretty tremendous. He's played 25.5 minutes on the average over his 7 games. Full expectation that it's an ongoing situation where he's going to see about 30 minutes tonight. I've got him 33. said about 30, I meant 30 plus. He didn't really hit that hard, though. The price is kind of leveled off with the production, with the roll. 59 on DraftKings, 64 on FanDuel, 2% FanDuel, 6% DraftKings. Kevin Porter had himself a productive day at a cheap price the other day. 21 and change minutes. He put up 30.7 FanDuel points. Got himself up to 1.0 for the season. He's playing about 16 and change minutes a night. I'm a little higher than that. He's level with the field-ish. 16% on FanDuel, 5% on DraftKings. He's below the field over there. But again, there's a lot of just spread with these value types. All of those guys are in that mix where you could replace shares from up here. You're just getting a lower end option. But again, and also when I say lower end option, with some of those guys, you're talking about the difference of a projected point and $500 salary. So the swing in, once the games actually start, the swing in viability is a lot more just reduced down to a point or two of fantasy production. So that's something to bear in mind when we have a lot of interchangeable value guys like that. Terrence Mann goes out and scores 2 additional fantasy points at his 3,900, and Amen Thompson doesn't at his 49. Granted, that's a massive projection difference. It's easier to catch up in that range. Ben Simmons, no real interest for me. Came up 4% of the time on either site. Field can have him if they want him more than that. I'm perfectly fine being in that range. 0.95 per minute so far this year. He's a low usage player. He does fill categories to a degree as far as, rebounding, a little bit of facilitation, but hasn't really popped for me this year. And in 24-ish minutes, I'm not seeing it. I think the field can have their 10%. I'll take 5. No results really for Terrence Mann. Another very low per minute player, 0.59 on 11% usage so far this year. Jalen Green is a guy who could pop in Houston just with some scoring to be done with no Freddie VanVleet. That's one I would keep an eye on. 16% here is an undercut to the field. 2% there in undercut to the field. I might give him a little bit of a nudge. I've already got him at... Where is he? The thing is, I'm kind of already giving him that nudge. I don't want to be too dramatic about it. I'm going to give him a tiny, tiny little push to level him back off. Another very scoring-dependent player. Going to need that shot to be falling. But 27% usage under normal circumstances and reasonable expectation that he's going to go out there and take a fair amount of shots today. So I would expect to see a little bit more, or make sure that you grab a little bit more, especially here. I would probably look to bring him back up toward the field there. That's a little bit extreme undercut for a good situation. Kobe White is who he is on the wrong side of the defensive matchup there for Chicago, but no issues with Kobe. I mean, he's 0.98 on DraftKings, FanDuel 1.04 on DraftKings. We got him 10% of the time FanDuel. We got him 2% of the time on DraftKings. A couple additional shares, a couple fewer shares in either direction. You're doing okay there. Norm Powell's been a good role player for the Clips so far this year. He's taken his scoring up to 1.03 per minute for fantasy, 26.4% usage. He's got to carry the load for a little while longer for the Clips, so he's been doing pretty well. It's just the price has kind of caught up with the production now. 6,800 forward and shooting guard, 7,300 same positioning, 2% undercut to the field, 12% undercut to the field, but more gently so. I'm fine with 12-15 on FanDuel. If you wanted to take him up, this is probably 2%, but undercutting 5. So if you wanted more of them between 2 and 10%, let's say, I don't think he's a bad fit on DraftKings. I think he's just getting boxed out in the math by some of these better guys. But in terms of a guy who at 7,300 for a mid-range price could go out there and drop 40 DraftKings points for you, I don't think that's completely terrible. And again, no pivoting today, no late swaps. So it's not like that's going to be the super end of the night and people will pivot into it. You're getting what you get at lock today. So I think players like that are a little bit interesting. Guys with upside without much field attention. You don't want to totally defy the math. You don't want to go out and say, all right, well, Terry said he might be okay, so give me 50%. I mean, if you're building 2 lineups, maybe that's okay. But, again, 10% if the field's at 5, 12%, somewhere in that territory. For a guy with a realistic mid-board ceiling, it's not a terrible investment on a short slate that, again, everything locks at the same time. I am interested in getting to some guys like that. Josh Giddey, less so, but does fall into like that category where he's just going to be low owned by the field. But he's only okay. 111 per minute so far this year on 22% usage, 116 on DraftKings. Perfectly fine. Again, the highest total of the slate, but he's on the wrong side of the defensive matchup. I greatly prefer the Cavs to the Bulls, I think is what I'm trying to say in general. Keon Ellis, another guy who could benefit from missing pieces in Sacto. Just kind of cheap. 4,000 on DraftKings, didn't really pop with all those better values, but could get in the mix a little bit. He's been a 0.78 this year on just 10% usage, though. Last year, 0.81 on 12%. Mix and match piece where maybe a few additional shares if the field's in the 2 to 5% range. Stephon Castle, not really coming up all that dramatically on either site. Was pretty good, though. In a game the other day, 34, was right around a point per minute. For the season, we're at 0.79. It's about where I've got him. And then we get some guys who, could definitely succeed today, but don't really land for the slate, don't really land in public lineups. And those are guys like Jordan Poole, like Dennis Schroeder. 2% of each of them. They're both undercuts to the field, but that doesn't mean the field's dramatically on them. 1%, same thing on DraftKings. Carrington, if he plays, maybe a little bit interesting at 6,200, 6,000, but didn't come up at all via the math. Io, same thing as the other guards on the Chicago side, but a few shares of them on FanDuel came up. And then most notably to me is the James Harden one. 3% of them on FanDuel, none of them on DraftKings. He's been a 1.40 per minute player, 136 on the FanDuel scale. With... Avert your eyes for a minute. Yeah, he's 12% owned by the field in that projection. I didn't say that. Getting him 0 against 12% ownership doesn't feel quite right. I think you can take up to the field 10, 12 on a short slate like this of Harden and be perfectly fine. I wouldn't press my luck and say, all right, the sim said get none against 12%, so let me double that and take 25. I don't think that's the move. But leveling off a player like James Harden is definitely okay. 47.9 points in 34.1 minutes the other day. Got him projected under that rate, but around his, he's at 136 for the season. That's exactly where I have him. If we revert back to last year's number, yeah, maybe that'll happen sometimes. But last year was still 112. And that came on 10 points fewer usage. Once this team normalizes from their injuries, then we'll have a different situation. But right now, the Hardens of the world, the Norm Powells of the world, going to continue to be interesting for a little bit. Is Kenrich out? He wasn't on the injury report. I just threw him 14. I think. I had him at 12. But that's a variable spot right now. Let's jump to forwards. You can see him. Where is he? Yeah, he's down here. So, didn't land at all in a 12-minute projection. But if he goes out and starts and plays 30 minutes, totally different scenario. He's a 0.8 per minute player last year on 13.2% usage, so it's not like we're getting a huge usage guy back. Not a big shot maker. In
Bear with me. I wasn't necessarily planning on looking up Kenrich Williams, but might as well. Where's my filters? Oh, stop with the pop-ups. I'm not buying that. Yeah, he played 14-9 a night in 69 games last year. So I mean, the idea that 16 minutes, something like that, maybe, but I don't think he comes back and is suddenly like a big piece, even with missing bodies. Fair point, rabbit hole. I don't get too deep into sweating defensive matchups like individual defense, but that is a good point. And that OKC team might not be able to rebound the basketball tonight, but they are still going to be able to lock down some defense on those guys. So yeah, fair point about Powell, and potentially impactful for Harden. Yeah, Kenrich right now doesn't look like a piece. If we see the situation change or announced to change, or if I find a reason to change it, maybe he gains a little ground. But right now, I don't think so. Amen, we talked about already. Tari Eason, again, putting up 1.23 per minute on 18% usage this year. Last year, not that much different, 1.19 on 18.8. He's just a decent per minute piece. 24-minute projected, 4,800 on DraftKings, small forward and power forward eligible, 55% essentially of our top 150. The field's getting there for sure, but we are a little bit above. I think that's 40-ish, 35-ish, 40-ish. So we're getting a nice chunk above the field on Tari Eason. Went out and put up 34 FanDuel points in 27 minutes the other day. Has upside to play into that 27, 28-minute range, certainly for a shorthanded Houston team. So it could be additional upside beyond. I didn't want to get too carried away with it. But I think this is like his at worst level. Not in terms of what he actually puts up when he goes and plays, but on this side of lock, I think this is the worst you would find him. And a significant piece on both. Keegan Murray and Kevin Huerter both coming up from Sacramento makes a lot of sense to me. 6,300 power forward and small forward, 47% Keegan Murray. On FanDuel, 34% and level with the field on him at 6,200 on DraftKings. I think that's perfectly fine. It's a little bit of a different price. There's no positional flex with the other forward spot there. You do obviously have forward and util. You can move him around too. But I think this is about right, 34, 35 and level. This, you could bring it down maybe to the 40 territory and still be a little bit above the field. But I'm fine with having him in essentially one out of every two. Kevin Huerter, that's a lot of Kevin Huerter, but again, doesn't really have to do anything exceptional other than just go out and play 30 to 30 and change minutes being Kevin Huerter here. So 63%, yeah, it's a lot, and we're above the field, but that's potentially advantageous. 30%, a little bit below the field on DraftKings for your 45 also makes sense. If you leveled that off with the field at, say, 35%, though, 38%, that's fine. DeRozan, 33 on FanDuel, 29 on DraftKings, undercut on both sides. He's a significant piece. 1.05 per minute this year, 1.07 last year. It's basically the same usage. 1.03 on DraftKings. We're not dramatically under the field on either. We're closer to the field on the DraftKings slate than we are on FanDuel. We'll have more ownership of them on FanDuel than we do on DraftKings. What I like about the top of Sacramento, and I mentioned it before, and I'll say it again, and I used this term the other day, they're kind of like Knicks West right now. Those top-end guys are playing major minutes. Those are significant minutes for starters. The averages, I mean, these guys play. So just buying run on a short slate like this, it's going to be a sprint slate. I don't mind a guy like DeRozan. That's why I don't mind getting this much Keegan Murray. I just think the minutes are going to be there.
It's 0.80 per minute this year on 15% usage from Murray, but he was 0.86 on 17 last year. Has the ability to get back to that level. DeRozan, again, is just, he's always around this level of production, and then you can spike some upside games if that weird mid-range jumper that he loves falls a little bit. He's been all right this season. I see no issues with going to him in those ranges, but having a little bit less in the field seems to make sense, and it looks like it's directly going into some of his teammates there. Lou Dort, who was just mentioned for his defense, doesn't look like a great piece for his fantasy upside, but he has been at 0.88 per minute this season. That's a little bit of an outlier, though. That's on 13.8% usage, which is down. He's not a big shot taker. Can definitely pick up, steals-based upside, like we've seen Dyson Daniels do every time he plays. But that comes and goes on a lot of slates. So that's where a little bit of the outlier so far is coming from. He's a low usage, low overall production player. 24% because he only costs 4,100 shooting guard and small forward on DraftKings. I get it. He is one of the value squares over there. But he's not an extreme value square. We're gently below the field here. We're pretty firmly below the field on the FanDuel slate at 49. Mobley is aggressively ahead of the field. Power forward and center eligible. That's kind of interesting. Good player, 54.7 FanDuel points in 35 minutes the other night when I had Allen instead of him. That one burnt me a little bit. A solid 1.32 per minute so far this season. He's seen 4% extra additional usage over what he was getting last year. Playing about 30 minutes a night. I've got him right in that territory. Good matchup across the board for the Cleveland players. I don't dislike this at all. He's 20%-ish on DraftKings and an undercut to the field at 76. We have a few more, I think, value squares to spread around at his positioning on the DraftKings slate than we do on FanDuel. But taking him up 25, 30 even, and leveling with the field on him, again, that's okay. Levine, we touched on already. Meh. Cam Thomas, we touched on already. That's one where I think a little bit more over here maybe, and this at worst, I think, on DraftKings. And I wouldn't surprise me to see him spike a decent day. Ingram, we talked about. Jalen Williams. All right, this is interesting. Jalen is one of the most highly projected players for ownership on the entire slate on both sites. We got a very hard undercut to the field at 16%. That's our biggest undercut, I'm almost positive, on DraftKings. 7,800, 1.24 per minute, both forward spots. He's a significant piece. Kind of surprised. Let me see if maybe the ownership come down and cooled with just some of those values emerging since the last time I looked. Let me see. For a 5-gamer, this one's wild as far as the different directions ahead of lock that this thing might head. It came way down. We're still below the field here, but it's way, way closer. It would be like a green, yellow, more gentle arrow. Field's like 10-ish points ahead of that, not like 4 times that, which is what it would have been previously. So the field number just came way, way, way down. Going by where these guys have Kenrich, and again, they've been all over the place, and I have no real trust, but just as a barometer, they've got him in similar territory to me, Kenrich, and like no ownership. Just since somebody asked. Dylan Brooks, no interest really. 0.61 per minute FanDuel, 0.63 DraftKings. He is coming up because he's cheap. 4,700 at small forward and shooting guard. 4,200 small forward only on DraftKings. I wouldn't want him very much more than what these numbers are at. Pretty low usage. Even when he gets more usage, 17.6 last year, he's a 0.68 player. Every now and then you spike a decent game on collecting a few additional fantasy points. Another player comes up with steals and so on. He's a mid-board like value dart that's not really presenting great value. I'm happy that we're below the field on both. And I would be more interested in having him in the 10% range, I think. I would probably go a little harder undercut. Let the field have the shares of the bad player. Jalen, by the way, on FanDuel, 30-ish%. And again, probably the hardest undercut to the field there. Since I checked it for DK, I'll check it for FanDuel. It's probably come down, but still high on FanDuel, I would say. Yeah. So it's not half. The field's in the 15, 20 points on top of this range. It's not quite half. You're going to take a few more, get 35%. It's just a really good player with the ability to go out and, bend the slate a little bit at those prices. 8,000 is not bad for 1.25 per minute. 7,800 is fantastic for 1.24 per minute. So that's a spot where, again, I would, out of everything the math is saying, that's one I would maybe want to be more level with the field. But again, good news that it's not as hard an undercut as is represented there because the ownership has changed since I ran this. Jabari is who he is, level with the field on the FanDuel slate. On DraftKings, we only got him 8% of the time, a little bit of an undercut there. 0.77 per minute so far this season, but he was 0.91 last year. I think there's reason to give him a little bit more than what he's put up so far this year. And again, definitely a guy who could benefit from just missing bodies. I got him, speaking of being able to give him more like what he did last year, I've got him basically at that level plus a sliver. I've actually got him at like 0.93. Oh, actually, that's the... Did I change this? That's the DK number, which is probably what he was last year. So right around last year's. I forgot I changed the reference, which column I was looking at. Boston, we talked about. Aaron Wiggins, another just medium strength player from OKC. In 21 minutes, he falls into the same category for me as like Lou Dort, as Kaysen Wallace, as Isaiah Joe, and the rest of these guys. They play a ton of guys. They play a ton of minutes, or they play medium minutes. And I think he's just about that level. He's been at 1.02 per minute, which is a nice uptick on 2.5 points of additional usage this year. 14.1% assist rate. Rebounds every now and again, 8.4% rebound rate. It's definitely going to be rebounds to go around out there, but I don't love the Aaron Wiggins play, and I'm glad we didn't really get him. 6% below the field, 3% below the field. Everybody here on DraftKings is in the onesie-twosie shares range. That does include good players like Normie Powell, who we talked about already. Does include Cam Johnson, who continues to just kind of float through existence at 0.87 and 18% usage. Super, super average. Cam Johnson is essentially an NBA average player. You could pop his stat line in for a rookie and get basically where he should be. But he's capable of producing around a point per minute on the right night. 30.5 fantasy points and 31.3 the other day is representative of that. 16% exposure, a little bit undercut to the field on FanDuel. More dramatic undercut at just 1% of them on DraftKings. If you wanted 5, 10%, go for it. You're talking about a few shares. Doesn't make a dramatic impact. We did get, that's Normie again. Nami. The name Norm should always be said in Cliff Clavin's voice. Corey Kispert, 10.6%. The only real outlier down toward the bottom of the board. He's 4,500 in an is spot against what is still a decent defensive team in Houston. 0.56 per minute so far this season has been the problem for Kispert in his handful of games. 8 games, 29 minutes. Getting his usual complement of minutes. I've got him right in that territory. But he's had clunkers. I mean, 7.8 FanDuel points in 24.5 minutes. Doesn't matter how cheap you are. You can make him 2,500 and that wouldn't pay the bills. Nobody else popping at the forward spots, really. 1% of Harrison Barnes, and honestly, the field can have him. Didn't get him on DraftKings. Didn't get any Trey. Going to debut at 6,000 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. I put him just at 20 minutes. I don't think he's going to see more than that. Good player, once we bounce him into the upper 20s, 30s, he'll hit the board a little harder, and he would if he was projected that way at these prices. I just don't see the minutes. Everybody else down the board, no shares and no real projection upside to talk about. Guys like Amir Coffey at 24 minutes. It's 0.61 per minute so far this season, 0.61 exactly last season. Has seen no spike despite a 1.5 of additional usage. No spike in output. Guys like that on a short slate, again, with no pivoting. Guys like Javonte Green. Guys like maybe a Coro. Anybody in this 20s kind of minutes range, Harrison Barnes probably qualifies for that as well. I got 3 shares where the field had none. Mixer. And you just want to be pivoting out of guys who were projected and priced exactly the same that just landed a little better. That's fine. But you really don't want to play that game with anybody projected below 20 minutes. Jump to the center position. Only a few guys to talk about here. Let me jump back to chat as well. Hit the like button if you get a chance. Subscribe on YouTube. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the new year, guys. I know you guys can get us there. It's been slow. I know all the regulars have subscribed. They've told all their friends. And we're talking about, come on, our regulars. We're all, well, me included, we're all nerds. We're all just sitting here. So it's a limited number of friends and family for everybody. I get it. So I think we've tapped that already. And we're at like 800. We need a little bit of new blood. We need to juice this up a little bit. Check out rotoscouts.com too. If you've never been there before, access to NBA, NHL, and NFL Showdown today and every day, under $1 a day for access to all 3 sports, projections, content for NFL, ongoing updates for NBA throughout the night for normal slates. Tonight, it's just going to be a nice relaxing evening for me today. But check out Roto Scouts. Also, these sims, I run these at acemind.io. There are sim partners. They've got an optimizer. They've got sim tools. Promo code RotoScouts, all in caps, gets you 20% off your first month. If you hang out for a few minutes after I'm done talking about centers, I'll pull up the lineup so you guys can get a look at some of the lineups that the sim built earlier. Alperen Şengün, monster shares on both sites. 73% FanDuel, center only, and only 1 bite at the apple at center, so pretty firmly getting a lot of him. But the idea that we're getting a ton of him paired with a bunch of Mobley at the power forward, given his eligibility, pretty nice. Jared Allen does come up a decent amount. I skipped over him when we were talking about him, the power forwards, because he's got that eligibility on FanDuel, but not on DraftKings. On DK, we got 74% Şengün above the field. Not crazy straight line up above the field. Field's in the, I believe, 50% range there. But we're getting a little bit more Şengün, and we're pairing him with a good amount of Jared Allen in the util spot, which is kind of interesting. Allen's coming up a little bit below the field, but given that tops out over 100, that does mean that pairing is coming up somewhat. Mobley comes up at 19% on DraftKings, where we got him 48% of the time on FanDuel, which is kind of also a little interesting. And I think it's mostly created by Allen. Allen at 6,900 is getting more exposed and a little bit more against the field than he is at 75 on FanDuel. At 82, Mobley comes up 48% of the time there, where we only got a hard undercut and 20% of Jared Allen. I think they're in direct competition there. And then considering that Mobley at 76 came up less on the DraftKings slate, I think that's getting boxed out directly by Allen with the 5.56 value score versus the 5.14. So it's just interesting that a cheaper price relative to the cap, the 82 versus the 76 for Mobley, we did get less of them and a bigger undercut over there. Interesting dynamics between those two players. Joval, 2% exposed on FanDuel. All those shares are just getting gobbled up by Şengün. But quite honestly, this is 2% and a gentle undercut, so that probably means the field that when this ran was 5, 10, call it 10 max. If you wanted to take 10 points directly out of Şengün and give it to Joval on the other side of that same matchup, I don't mind it. It's just not a big minutes play. Joval is a very good per minute guy, but he doesn't play a ton of minutes. He's averaging 21 on the season. I have him at 22. You could get there. God forbid he went out and played 26. You'd be there, and you'd probably want to have him if the field's at 2% or 4%, and you can get a good position by just going up to 10, 12, 15 max, I would say. Got a lot more of them. Call it the DK number as the max. 16%. That's below the field on DraftKings when this ran. Might have changed a little bit. Leveling him off at 20% DraftKings, no problem. But again, you're making a decision. You're building a little fort on a hill if you do that. Nicky Claxton, 1 and change, 111 on FanDuel, 107 on DraftKings so far this year. Played 32 minutes the other night, put up 29 FanDuel points. I think the minutes are the most noteworthy part. I got him at 29 today. He's only averaged 24 for the season, but hopefully that's representative of an uptick. Good per minute player. We got him on FanDuel. He's the next most highly owned center only guy. It's what, 94% of our center ownership is going to either Şengün or Claxton. And then 3.3% to Zubac and Vooch further down. And 1 share goes to Zach Collins of all people. Or maybe that came at the power forward, whatever. Yeah, I don't mind the Claxton play. And it's another one where, given how hard an undercut it is to the field, maybe we don't do this too much. But if you're stripping down some Şengün shares, throwing a few additional to Claxton is not completely terrible anyway, either at 5,700. Especially if those minutes do realistically stick in the upper 20s. 14% and an undercut to the field at 57 on DraftKings. Same thing, and it's a lighter undercut there. So if you wanted to take him 20 and change and take it directly out of Şengün, I think that's also okay. Sabonis is the big sacrifice. He does have power forward on FanDuel, but he's getting bottled up by those guys a little bit. But if you wanted to take some of Mobley and figure out a way to make the price difference up and put it directly into Sabonis, again, he's probably double this, 15 kind of range. That's a player who is more than good enough and a triple-double waiting to happen in this situation that you could definitely juice that a little bit. 1.24 per minute this year, 1.38 last year on a few more shots, but a good category stuffer. I mean, look at Sabonis compared to most of these other guys. 72.3% true shooting. Probably going to come down a little bit as time goes on, but still a lot of easy buckets. 26.2% assist rate, 17.9% rebounding rate. He is a category filler. 8% DraftKings below the field at 9,500 center only. I get it more here. You know, a few additional shares is fine. Or being at that 8% is fine, 5%, whatever. Over here, where he does have the power forward, and we could get to him in combination with Şengün for still a fair price for the two, considering Şengün at 79. That wouldn't be a bad combo to play with and just see what you can build. You've got reasonably comparable pivot point here, considering that most of those shares are coming up at power forward. So that's going to be an interesting back and forth. The Mobley-Sabonis, essentially directly head-to-head. Not that they're playing each other, but in a fantasy sense. That's going to be a really interesting inflection point for the FanDuel slate. DraftKings as well, but I think it's a different proposition on the DraftKings slate. It's a 6-minute advantage in Sabonis' favor. Mobley's capable, certainly. He played 35 the other night. He's capable of kicking that up a little bit. That's definitely one to watch. And that's a spot I think I would, across 150, probably take a little of this and probably level Sabonis up to 15 or so. If I could take some of this and maybe some of those. But my goal in getting to Sabonis would be probably to have him paired with Şengün in a lot of lineups at power forward and center. So I wouldn't take too many out of here because I want those Şengün centers. Again, Jabari, definitely a playable part. 31% FanDuel, 8% DraftKings. We talked about him in the forward breakdown. Robinson Earl didn't get him on FanDuel. 4% of the time on DraftKings, power forward and center, eligible for 45 over there. Makes sense that he came up a little bit, but that is not a great value score. 4.41 when we're looking for 5.5. The 0.71 per minute player so far this year. Not much better last year at 0.79. 22 FanDuel points, 23 FanDuel points in 31.6 minutes the other day. Not really a paramount play on either site, and math telling us to get below the field. Wemby is always uncomfortable to leave fully on the table. We got him 2% of the time on FanDuel. He's 11-4. He's just a tough price fit on this slate. 10-5 on FanDuel. We got him 4% of the time. Either site, a few additional shares of a guy who could go out and put up 100 fantasy points on any given slate, even in this matchup. Fine. There's nothing wrong with going to 10 on either site on Wemby. Monster ceiling. He hasn't gotten there as much this year so far in the short sample of 10 games. 1-5-1. The usage is down a little bit. The shots have come down a little bit. 31-2 down to 27-9 so far this year. But just ridiculous skills, blocks. He is the definition of a guy who does both creation and collection of fantasy points. Alexander Sarr didn't really get much of him on either site. Kuzma coming back maybe potentially bumps him a little. Although I don't remember saying Kuzma's name as we were talking through this, other than mentioning that he was back. Where's the Kuz? Didn't get him on DraftKings. 7,500 over there, power forward only. 71 FanDuel, small forward and power forward. Interesting eligibility, 71. Just 2% of the time on the FanDuel slate. We're talking about a .99 player so far in his 3 games that he managed to play so far this year. But he was a 1.15 player last year. Roughly 30% usage guy. It's going to be impactful putting him back in. I've got him at 28 minutes. That's what's cutting down the exposure a little bit. If you gave him back full 30s minutes, he would look significantly better. Zubac is a player I'm also interested in having a little bit more of. 7,800 on the FanDuel slate. We got him, but just 1% of the time. We didn't get him at on DraftKings at 8. It's another guy. I think I would tend to grab a couple additional shares of Zubac, of Vooch. Just these talented, veteran, established centers who are good per minute guys in their typical roles. I do think that there's a little bit of room for those guys. Also, maybe some of it comes out of there, some of it comes out of here, and you can kick those exposures up a little bit just to get to good per minute players where the field is not quite there as much as they're going to be on those big guys. They're all big guys, but those big exposure guys. Good argument to be made that Vooch could benefit greatly in this matchup now. Or Zubac, rather. Vooch, between the two, would have the tougher time, I would expect, with the Cleveland front court. Zubac should be able to do basically whatever he wants. He's a good player, too. I mean, Zubac is probably a little underrated. 58.5 true shooting, 12.7% assist, 18.8% rebounding rate so far this year. That's the second highest rebounding rate at the position on this slate, behind only Jared Allen. Vooch is a good player. Power says Mamba Allen was missing easy-ass shots and putbacks and couldn't keep up with how fast Brooklyn plays, so he got pulled. I can see the same thing happening tonight because Chicago plays just as fast. That adds up. What did Allen play in that game? 21-1. That would explain the dearth of fantasy scoring. I wasn't watching the minutes in that one. I was just watching the result. Like I said, I had him in that in a key lineup the other day and was wishing that I had Mobley. So, yeah, that explains a lot. Let me pull up Ace Mind. Stephen Jongitude, you're very welcome. I don't know if you're thanking me or if you're thanking Power and Mamba, but those guys are also helpful there. Let me pull up Ace Mind, and we'll take a quick peek at some of these lineups so you guys can get a feel for what these constructions look like that we've been talking about behind the math here. Behind the math. It's like a really nerdy show. Airing on VH1. We got a bunch of washed up NBA players talking about their best games and then showing highlights, kind of like they do. A lot of Şengün popping here. This is DraftKings. I'm going to predict that these are going to be a little starsy scrubsy as we look. But it does kind of depend on your definition of what a scrub is. Right? Like in a per minute sense, Tari Eason and Amen Thompson, not really scrubs. They put up good per minute numbers. Kevin Huerter is a reasonable mid-board veteran player with a, 0.8 and change. Isaiah Joe, more scrubby, in my mind anyway. And then there's Jared Allen, who we were just talking about, potentially getting run off the court again. Got to a lot of him. That's one to consider. I don't like just, speculative things like that. Like, oh, he's going to go back and not play his minutes average. I would never project it that way. But if you're like hand building one lineup, that's a different proposition than you need the math to be right across 150. Hand building one lineup, hand building three lineups, or however you build them. You can make decisions like that a little bit more. You can play with things like that a little bit more. You definitely don't want to necessarily knock him out of the box. If you wanted to say, all right, I think maybe he gets run off the court here, so I'm going to take 2 minutes off of his average. Something like that is the correct way to approach that. I think we talked about LeVert, Mamba. Almost positive I mentioned him. He was 10% exposed FanDuel, a little bit below the field. 9% exposed DraftKings, and a little bit more below the field. 5,100 over there. 55 on FanDuel. DraftKings, I would say, is the more advantageous spot to have him, but that's why it looks like the field is there a little bit more. He's been really good in a per minute sense so far this year. 117 per minute, and it's actually come on 5 points less usage than what he needed to get to 103 per minute last year. But we're talking about a version of Karis LeVert that's out there with a 68.2% true shooting rate right now. Taking 3.5 threes a game, making 46.9% of them. It's just, I think, is a little bit inflated, and he's priced correctly for maybe not quite 117, but he's priced for 1 and change, and that's kind of the realistic version of him. I think he's fine, but it's not a runaway freight train of a play as far as the numbers go. Should not meet with much challenge as far as anybody on Chicago stopping him from taking those shots that he wants. Let me see. Bear with me one sec. Mamba always good for a curveball. Power loves LeVert too. All right. Can I find justification to give him a little bit of a nudge or some more minutes here? Let's see. Yeah, so I've got him, again, I've got him at, this is Karis LeVert we're talking about. I know it's not on the screen. I've got him at 1.06, which is essentially taking a tenth of a point off the uptick in production and leveling him mostly back to his standard. You could take that away. It essentially amounts to one. What is he? 1.7. It's probably if you just gave him exactly what he's done this year and say, all right, the regression's not going to happen today. Drawing a line in the sand. You shall not pass. I would project him then instead of at the 25.5 DraftKings points I have. I would project him for 28.02 DraftKings points. So it is a difference for sure. Depends on how much faith you have in him being able to replicate this season's current per minute numbers in a matchup against Chicago tonight. I don't think you're making a mistake. You're taking a position against the field. Or you're taking a guy that I would have below the field and leveling him back up to the field probably is more correct. But yeah, I would give him 2.5 additional DraftKings points from where I have him projected if you want to get 2 more of them and level him off as the player he's been this year. Now I have to undo that. I might give him a little bit more in the next update. Slight nudge just to get him a little bit more representation for the 10 games of this year. But I don't want to get carried away on a short sample for a player that is fine, but not really sure that we continue to get that uptick. So nice to see some of the Joe Val pivot that I mentioned coming up a little bit in the top lineups. And if you took more of them out of here, you would see more of them. I would not mind boxing out some of those Jared Allens with some Joe Vals. I would also consider doing the same with Vooch. I keep saying Vooch. I mean Zubac. Vooch is fine. I like Zubac is the guy I'm kind of interested in getting a little bit ahead of the field here. Not really seeing him math-wise, though. There's one. Yeah, just limited. But that's one that's not going to hit the board as far as the projection goes. But we know a secret that the math doesn't about what's going to be playing for Oklahoma today. Reed Shepard dropping into a bunch of those uncomfortably. Tons of amen. The big theme here is a lot of Houston in all these top-end lineups just because of that value that's created there. Ton of amen, ton of Tari Eason, ton of Şengün. It's definitely going top-end guy, and a lot of those are Shea. Another essentially top-end guy in Şengün, although price-wise, that's a different story. And then it's like Superstar 2, one from the upper middle class, and then your value guys. Is basically what these builds look like, if you had to describe it. Like this one comes up super balanced, right? Fox, Herter, Amen, Jalen Williams, Jared Allen, Lou Dort, Mobley, and Claxton. There's not a superstar in that lineup. So it does look like you can get away with some different kinds of constructions as far as just the average build here, which is interesting. I was thinking it would be more Starsy Scrubsy. And it might just be a product of most of the quote-unquote scrubs, again, are more in the 4,000, 5,000 range, and more guys like Ahmed, guys like Tari Eason. There's some of your DraftKings inspiration. Let's jump to FanDuel real quick, and then we're going to punch out of here, get stuff updated. Let's see, there's a good justification for getting to some more James Harden than we did. The 1 or 2 shares of him, he's in the very top lineup. A little bit of Claxton creeping through, but dominant Şengün in the first 20 here. So again, the Şengün-Mobley pairing, a lot of that here. A lot of that going on. There's a Sabonis that gets into the center spot alongside Allen and Smith. That's a weird one. So that's the one I'm kind of interested in, is the Sabonis-Mobley rotation there and where we can get to Şengün-Sabonis. I forgot I got to look at both these power forward spots. There's one. Şengün, Sarr, and Sabonis is interesting. With SGA. So getting Shea, Sabonis, Şengün. This is a more Starsy, Scrubsy, think what you will of like Alex Sarr, Chris Paul out of the middle. I hate Dylan Brooks. I don't like that lineup, but it suggests to me that there are builds where you could go Şengün, Sabonis, SGA, and change up some of those mid-board guys. But the point of that is, the reason I was looking for it is what I was talking about with that ability to potentially pivot these two guys and create a little bit of an ownership bubble with Şengün. I think that's interesting, the way that those came up on FanDuel. At the guard spots, it essentially looks like star-ish type guy, and it's mostly SGA. And then a value guy. But the value guys, again, are fairly mid-board, like Amen, some Jose Alvarado in there. You do get some pairings of, I just saw it, SGA and Donovan Mitchell, with Mobley and Şengün in that lineup, and Keegan Murray also. That's not bad. You're taking a four-man value pack of Reed Shepherd, Amen Thompson, Kevin Huerter, and Dylan Brooks to get there. But the other five guys in that lineup, that's pretty effective. I don't dislike that lineup at all. So you can get some interesting pairings here. It's just a matter of where you take the value, right? On FanDuel, like this one went with DeRozan over here, so we got SGA and Amen instead. It does look like you can get 4 to 5 upside stars-ish, stars to upper middle class types, and then your solid little core of value guys, and it's super straightforward about who the value guys are. We do get some spread of like Keon Ellis and Kevin Huerter here. Keon's getting into some of these. Again, with no Monk, he should benefit a little bit. Some of the Dorts and what's his faces that I just saw a second ago when I started that sentence. I'm now forgetting his name. Whatever. You know what I'm talking about. The guys from OKC, the Isaiah Joes and the Wigginses of the world. Wiggins was the guy. I feel like it's a little bit more of a lean towards star scrubs, and I think the pocket for most of the value guys is through the shooting guard small forward spot. It's really what it looks like. Amen does have point guard eligibility, so some of those shares are kicking over here. But if you look, we are getting more pay up guys through the point guard. I think we're getting most of our value squares in these 4 spots. And it's really, it's probably 4 for the best builds. And then pay up at the power forward and the center. Just some downboard guys. I don't know if I mentioned Bilal Coulibaly's name. With good cause. Coulibaly came up just 2% of the time on FanDuel and 0% of the time on DraftKings. 0.90 per minute so far on the season. It's 0.72 last year. I could give him a minor nudge, but Kuzma coming back. I might give him a slight uptick. Make it a little bit more representative of the bubble of production this year. I'll flag that one too. So we'll take a look. I don't think it's nothing that's going to make him noteworthy. I just noticed that I hadn't said anything about him. Otherwise, guys, I think that's bringing us down toward the end here. Dorian Finney-Smith is out. Okay. That's an interesting piece of news to get at the end of the show. Whoops. For one thing, that'll give Jalen Wilson a little bit of an increase from the minutes that I was giving him. Back toward upper teens, 20s. It's 28 minutes that are going to hit the board. I think a handful of them are going to go directly in that way. And then it's probably benefit for a couple minutes apiece down the board for the guys that I just had in the teens. At the top end, I don't know how much changes. We'll watch who starts. I don't think it's a kind of situation where it's going to be like, oh, Ben Simmons is going to play 30 minutes now. I don't see that. As far as like DFS production, that would probably be the most beneficial thing that could happen, but I don't think that's what we're getting here. It's one I'm going to want to watch. I'll think about it. I'll set it up, and we'll go from there if we get a different starting lineup. And that should be coming down in a little bit. It's 6:20. All right, cool. Something to work on. Levert the R&B group helped the brother out many times, says Power. I got to say, I'm unfamiliar with Levert the R&B group. Is that what they call it? Just straight up Levert? Is that somebody's name, or is that like something I'm not aware of? Now I got something else to check out. Good stuff, gang. Fun show. Hour and a half. 41 people still here hanging out. Hit the like button down there. Check out rotoscouts.com. Access to everything, guys. I'm trying to make this as gentle on everybody's bankroll as possible because I want you entering your contests and using these projections and succeeding, and then we all grow, right? So we're asking for under $1 a day on a weekly, monthly, or quarterly plan. Decreasing prices as you go up the scale in time gets you access to everything. Basketball, football, hockey. When baseball comes back, baseball. If other things pop up in the meantime, I could probably figure out projections for golf, maybe some NASCAR, et cetera, et cetera. It's down the line. First off, can't handle what I'm doing now, or barely can, time-wise. So we'll get some more there. But a lot of value packed into your $1 a day, under $1 a day. And check out acemind.io for your sim and optimization needs. Promo code RotoScouts all in caps, 20% off your first month over there. The OJs I've heard of. Rings a vague bell in there. I don't know if I could. I definitely know that I could not suddenly sing one of their songs, but that name is tickling a memory in there somewhere. I'll give it a listen. And yeah, that's it. On that note, listen to the OJs. And you guys absolutely rock out there. And yeah, let me go get stuff updated. Can't find my way out of this show for some reason. Good luck out there tonight, guys. Somebody go win something. We'll talk to you tomorrow.